Christmas was supposed to be about family, warmth, and coming home. I still remember the chill in the air when the phone rang, just 3 days before the 25th. It only took 3 words to end it all. Don't come back. That single phone call didn't just hurt. It shattered everything I believed about love, loyalty, and belonging. It turned my entire world into a cold, empty house. But sometimes, losing your place completely in someone else's story is the only devastating way to begin your own. Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Cynthia Norman. I'm 67 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. I always thought Christmas was about coming home, until the year my own family told me to stay away. The tree stood quietly in the corner of my living room, smaller than the ones Robert used to drag home, but still too big for one person. The lights blinked softly, the same warm white Ethan loved as a boy. I told myself I was decorating for the grandkids. The truth was, I couldn't stand how empty the house felt without the glow. A red ribbon slipped between my fingers, brushing against the veins that now mapped my hands. My wedding ring caught the reflection of the lights, flashing gold. 7 Christmases since Robert died, and I still couldn't take it off. "Merry Christmas, Robert," I whispered. Only the refrigerator hummed in reply. Christmas used to be laughter, cinnamon, chaos, Robert making jokes only he found funny, Ethan pretending he hated carols but humming along anyway. Now, silence lived here. I reached for my phone, flour still dusting the case from the pie I'd baked. I had gifts wrapped for the kids, a flannel shirt for Ethan, even the little train set ready under the tree. I imagined their laughter filling the house again. All I needed was to hear Ethan's voice confirming the plan. The line rang twice, then a click. "Hi, Amanda speaking." "Oh, hi dear. It's Cynthia. Is Ethan around?" A pause. "He's in the garage, just packing up for the holidays." "Packing up?" I said. "You're still coming up to Seattle this weekend, right?" Amanda hesitated. "Actually, we're spending Christmas at my mom's this year." The words didn't land right away. They floated, heavy and slow before settling somewhere under my ribs. "Oh," I said softly. "I see. It just makes more sense this year," she added quickly. "With her health and everything. But we'll definitely FaceTime. The kids can show you their presents." I looked at the crooked little snowman ornament Ethan made in 2nd grade, its smile smudged and uneven. My throat tightened. "That's nice," I managed. "I'm sure they'll have a wonderful time." "We didn't want you to feel obligated to travel," she continued. "You can stay home and relax, okay? You deserve the rest." That last line hit like frost against glass. Stay home. Relax. You deserve it. The kind of kindness people use when they've already left you behind. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile no one could see. "Tell Ethan I said Merry Christmas." "I will," she replied. "Take care, Cynthia." Click. I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear long after the call ended. When I finally lowered it, my hand was shaking. The lights from the tree blurred. The room swayed slightly, as though it couldn't bear the silence either. I sank onto the couch, staring at the framed photo on the mantel. Robert with his arm around a much younger me. Ethan between us, frosting on his chin, all of us mid-laugh. The memory was so alive it hurt. I opened the old photo album I'd planned to show the grandkids. Robert holding Ethan on his shoulders to place the star. Ethan missing a front tooth beaming. Me, in that hideous reindeer sweater Robert loved. We were frozen in that joy, untouched by time. Just one Christmas, I whispered. It's just one Christmas without them. But something inside me answered back. You said that last year, too. The cinnamon candle on the mantel flickered, filling the room with a scent that used to comfort me. Now it only deepened the ache. I rubbed my thumb over my ring, feeling its familiar grooves. You see this, Robert? I murmured. Your son just benched me for Christmas. If he'd been here, he would have cracked a joke, pulled me close, told me not to take it so personally. But grief is cruel that way. It makes you long for the one person who can no longer comfort you. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, Seattle was painted in cold gray. Tiny flakes drifted down, melting as soon as they touched the ground. Somewhere out there, Ethan was loading gifts into a car, heading toward a Christmas that didn't have a place for me. I could already hear the polite explanations he'd give when someone asked, "Is your mom coming?" "She's taking it easy this year." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Maybe I'd made it too easy to forget me. Maybe I'd spent so long saying I'm fine that they'd started to believe it. I rested my forehead against the cold glass. Maybe this is my fault, I whispered. Behind me, the tree glowed patiently, the only witness to my quiet unraveling. I picked up the phone again, stared at Ethan's name, and hovered over the call button. For a heartbeat, I almost pressed it. Almost asked, "Are you sure? Don't I get a seat at the table anymore?" But pride, or maybe exhaustion, held my thumb still. I turned the phone face down and left it there. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy coat, familiar and suffocating. I sat back down, staring at the tree until the lights blurred again. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't fill the air with fake cheer. I let the silence stay. Let it breathe. Let it tell me the truth I'd been avoiding. I had spent years waiting for others to make space for me, to invite me back, to remember what I meant. But maybe home wasn't something I could wait for anymore. Maybe I had to rebuild it myself. Outside, the snow fell harder now, whispering against the window pane. I closed my eyes and took a slow, steady breath. For the first time in years, I didn't pray for someone to call. I just sat there, feeling the ache, the quiet, and somewhere beneath it, the faintest pulse of something else, something that almost felt like strength. That was the night I learned silence could be more than loneliness. Sometimes, silence is the moment your life begins again. Morning came with a hush that didn't feel peaceful, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, thick and aware, like the house itself was holding its breath. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old pipes groan and the faint whisper of wind beneath the eaves. The house had started to sound like a person lately, an old friend trying to remind me it was still here. When I finally rose, light crept through the curtains in thin, shy strips. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon, left over from the candle that had burned out sometime during the night. It used to make the house feel warm. Now, it just made me think of everything missing. I made tea the way I always did. 1 sugar, no milk, and poured it into Robert's old mug, the one that said, "World's Okayest Librarian." He used to grin every time I used it. "It's a high bar, Sin," he'd joke. Now the words just sat there, faded but loyal. The kettle's whistle faded, and I carried my cup into the living room. The tree still glowed faintly from the night before. lights blinking in soft, patient rhythm. Beneath it lay the wrapped gifts that had no place to go. A train set for Max, a book about space for Lily, a flannel shirt for Ethan, though I wasn't sure anymore if he even liked flannel. I set the mug down and picked up the old photo album from the coffee table. Its leather cover was worn soft, its corners curling from time and touch. When I opened it, the smell of paper and glue rose like a memory. The first picture was from our honeymoon in Vienna. Me in that awful yellow coat Robert insisted I buy. "You'll thank me later," he'd said. He was right. I do now. I traced our younger faces with my finger, then flipped through the years. Ethan's first Christmas, his graduation, our road trips in that beat-up blue Chevy. Every image felt like a window into a place that no longer existed. I turned another page and stopped. The last Christmas before Robert died. His smile was softer, tired around the edges, but his hand still held mine. That night, after everyone had gone home, he'd said, "You'll take care of them, won't you, Sin?" And I had, or at least I'd tried. But it's hard to hold a family together when grief starts pulling at all the seams. The house creaked, as if agreeing. I looked up at the wall of framed photos and thought, "You remember everything, don't you?" I spent the afternoon moving slowly through old habits. I watered Robert's plants, wiped the kitchen counter, dusted shelves no one would see. Every sound, the clink of dishes, the low hum of the heater, felt louder than usual, like the house was trying to keep me company. At some point, I wandered into the hallway and stopped in front of the closed door to Robert's study. I hadn't gone in there in years. It used to smell like him: coffee, ink, and that woodsy cologne he wore even when he wasn't leaving the house. My hand hesitated on the doorknob before I finally turned it. The air inside was cool and still. His desk sat untouched, papers neatly stacked, a fountain pen resting across a yellow pad. The bookshelf along the wall bowed slightly under the weight of decades: novels, atlases, and travel guides for all the places he dreamed we'd visit once he retired. One book caught my eye: a small leather-bound scrapbook tucked between two heavy volumes. I pulled it out carefully. Across the front, in Robert's familiar scrawl, were the words, "Adventures we haven't had yet." My breath caught. Inside were clipped magazine photos of snowy peaks, cobblestone streets, and sunlit plazas. Little notes were written under each one. "You'd love this cafe." "Someday." "Save this one for spring." Halfway through, the pages turned blank, empty spaces waiting for the rest of the story. I ran my fingers over the empty pages. "You really thought we'd have more time, didn't you?" I whispered. The silence that answered didn't sting the way it used to. It felt almost tender, like the house was listening. I closed the scrapbook and looked around the study. Every object seemed to hum with memory. The chair where he'd read late into the night, the groove on the desk from years of his restless tapping, even the faded stain on the rug where he'd once spilled coffee and laughed about it for days. This house remembered everything: every laugh, every argument, every goodbye. And somehow, sitting there, surrounded by all that remembering, I felt less alone. I carried the scrapbook back to the living room and set it beside the photo album. Outside, sleet had started again, drumming lightly against the windows. I curled up on the couch and let the rhythm fill the room. Robert's voice came back to me, quiet, steady, like the rustle of turning pages. "You take care of everyone, Cynthia. Just don't forget to take care of yourself." I smiled faintly. "I'm trying, Robert." I really am. For the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it stretch out and settle around me. The lights from the tree blinked gently across the walls, scattering fragments of color like tiny promises. The house was still full of ghosts, but not the kind that haunted, the kind that held you, reminded you where you came from, and whispered that you weren't done yet. Maybe that was the real gift of memory. It hurt, but it also kept you tethered to the parts of yourself that still wanted to live. That night, I fell asleep on the couch, the scrapbook pressed to my chest. And for the first time since Ethan's call, I didn't dream of what I'd lost. I dreamed of all the adventures we hadn't had yet. Rain fell steady that morning, a soft percussion against the roof, as if the world outside was keeping time with my heartbeat. I sat by the window, steam rising from my tea, watching the city dissolve behind the glass. The scrapbook lay open on the table, adventures we haven't had yet. Robert's handwriting stared back at me, neat but slightly slanted, alive in a way that broke me a little every time I saw it. I dreamed about that book all night, about him, about the blank pages waiting to be filled. And when I woke up, something in the house had shifted. It was still silent, but the silence felt different, expectant, almost alive. I brushed my fingertips over the edge of the scrapbook and whispered, "What would you do, Robert?" The rain answered for him. Or maybe it was my own heart whispering back, "You'd tell me to stop waiting." It startled me how clear that sounded in my mind. I laughed softly, shaking my head. You always did know how to push me. For so long, I'd lived for other people. Ethan, the grandchildren, even strangers at the library who needed a kind word. I'd made a home out of selflessness and convinced myself that was love. But looking at those blank pages, I realized I'd left no room in my life for me. Maybe that needed to change. The thought terrified me and thrilled me in equal measure. I turned on the old laptop, its screen flickering like it too. Wasn't sure it wanted to wake up. When the homepage appeared, I typed, "Solo Travel Christmas." Then I laughed aloud. 67 and Googling how to run away, I muttered. But my fingers kept moving. Munich, Vienna, Prague. Photos filled the screen. Christmas markets glowing like something out of a snow globe. Strangers smiling, holding mugs of steaming cocoa. The world looked alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. One headline caught me. Why traveling alone might be the most loving thing you ever do for yourself. I clicked. The first line read, "When you choose yourself, you give others permission to see you differently." I stared at it for a long time. Maybe that was what Robert had meant all those years ago, when he told me not to forget myself. Almost before I knew it, I'd opened a new tab and typed, "Flights to Munich." The little spinning circle took forever. My heart pounded. I could hear Ethan's voice in my head. "Mom, are you serious?" But this time, I didn't shrink from it. I hovered over the glowing button, took a breath that trembled in my chest, and clicked, "Book now." The confirmation email appeared instantly. I sat there staring at it, the blue light reflecting off my face. It felt unreal, like I just opened a door to a life that had been waiting behind me all along. The phone rang. Ethan's name lit the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Hey, Mom," he said casually. "Just checking in. You doing okay?" "I'm fine," I said, almost too fast. "Good. We'll call again. Tomorrow. The kids are out playing in the snow." "That's nice," I replied, smiling to myself. "I hope they're bundled up." There was a pause. You sure you're okay, Mom? You sound different. I looked at the ticket confirmation still open on the screen. I am different, I said softly. I made plans. Oh? With who? With myself. He laughed, thinking I was joking. Good for you, Mom. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet settle again. But this silence wasn't the same one that had haunted me. It felt lighter, full of potential. By afternoon, I was knee-deep in the hallway closet, searching for my old suitcase. It was wedged behind boxes of Robert's books and a stack of winter coats I hadn't touched in years. When I finally dragged it out, dust rose in little clouds. I coughed and laughed at the same time. You and me, old friend, I said to the suitcase. We're going somewhere. Inside was a folded map of Italy, our last trip together. His handwriting circled small towns we'd never reached. Someday, he'd written. Someday is now, I whispered. I began to pack, slowly, deliberately. A wool sweater, my warmest coat. The small wooden angel ornament Robert had carved our final Christmas together. I wrapped it in a scarf and tucked it carefully into the corner of the suitcase. Then I stopped and looked around the living room. The tree blinked softly in the corner, ornaments catching the light like tiny stars. The same lights that had witnessed every lonely night, every quiet meal for one. Maybe I'm finally listening, I told the house. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the fire, the heat warming my knees. I raised the glass toward Robert's photo on the mantel. To second chances, I said, even the ones that come late. The rain outside swelled, a steady applause against the window. On the table, the scrapbook sat next to my printed ticket. I pressed my palm against it and felt my heartbeat echo through the cover. I'm coming for those blank pages, Robert, I whispered, and I'll fill everyone. For years, I'd been the woman waiting for everyone else to come home. That night, I realized something simple, terrifying, and true. I didn't need rescuing. I just needed to choose myself. And I finally had. The airport was a strange kind of chaos. Loud, bright, alive. The exact opposite of my quiet little house. For the first time in years, I wasn't watching someone else board a flight. I was the one leaving. My suitcase wheels clattered behind me as I moved through the terminal. The noise felt overwhelming at first. The buzz of announcements, laughter, crying babies. But beneath it all, there was a pulse of something that felt like freedom. I kept touching my ticket, half afraid it might vanish if I stopped. Seattle to Munich. Just seeing the words made my stomach flip. I'd told no one except a quick note left for Ethan. Spending Christmas somewhere snowy. Don't worry. Love, Mom. I'd stared at it for a long time before walking out the door. Now, surrounded by strangers wrapped in scarves and chatter, I realized how small my world had been and how big it suddenly felt again. At the gate, I found my seat, 14A, window side. I took a breath, clutching the small wooden angel in my pocket, the same one Robert had carved years ago. My good luck charm, my reminder that I wasn't really alone. A man appeared beside me, juggling a carry-on and a book. Excuse me, that's me. 14B, he said with a warm, apologetic smile. He was tall, gray-haired, probably around my age, wearing an old leather jacket that looked well-traveled. Oh, of course, I said, standing so he could slide in. No problem. As he settled, he turned to me. I'm James O'Connor. Cynthia, I replied, smiling politely. He nodded at my hands. You, a nervous flyer? I looked down. I'd been twisting my wedding ring without realizing it. Just out of practice. He chuckled softly. You and me both. My daughter keeps telling me to get out more, so here I am. Attempting to live a little, I think was the phrase. I smiled, relaxing a little. Mine told me to stay home and relax, so naturally I booked a flight across the ocean. He laughed, a real, full laugh that caught the attention of the woman in the row ahead. Ah, rebellion at our age. The sweetest kind. Something in his voice, the warmth, the humor, eased the weight that had been sitting on my shoulders since Robert's death. The plane taxied, engines roaring to life. As it lifted, the lights of Seattle flickered beneath the clouds, and for a brief, dizzying second, I felt untethered from everything that had kept me small. When the seatbelt sign turned off, James ordered black coffee. It's the only way I stay awake through these long hauls, he said, then tilted his cup toward me. Care to join my bad habits? Tea for me, I said, smiling. Old librarian habits die hard. Ah, a woman of words, he said thoughtfully. That explains the calm energy. You look like someone who's read her way through storms. The comment caught me off guard. I suppose I have, I said quietly. We fell into an easy rhythm of small talk where we were headed, the weather, our kids. Then, somewhere over Canada, the conversation deepened. Are you running away or running toward something? He asked suddenly, his tone curious, not prying. I laughed softly. Maybe both. But mostly, I think I'm running toward the old Cynthia, the one I seem to have misplaced somewhere along the way. James nodded slowly, as if he understood that better than I expected. That's a good direction, he said. Sometimes losing yourself isn't the tragedy. Staying lost is. For a moment, the hum of the plane filled the space between us. I looked out the window. The sky was endless blue, the kind of blue that makes you believe in beginnings again. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket and began to sketch absent-mindedly. Lines curved across the page, becoming something that looked like a landscape. You draw? I asked. Not well, he said, smiling. But it keeps me from thinking too much. What were you before this trip? An architect. Retired now. I build less and remember more. He paused, then glanced at me. And you? Librarian, I said. I organized other people's stories for a living. Forgot to write my own. James chuckled softly. Well, here's your chance. We talked until the cabin lights dimmed. Somewhere between laughter and quiet, I realized how natural it felt, how easy it was to talk to someone without history attached. When I closed my eyes, the plane humming gently beneath me, I thought about how strange it was, the way grief can make you shrink, and how a single conversation can make you expand again. Hours later, when I woke, James had draped a blanket over me. My teacup sat neatly on the tray table, and beside it, a note on a napkin. You were right. Rebellion suits you. I smiled, tucking the napkin into my book. As we began our descent, the first light of morning stretched across the clouds. Munich shimmered below, gold and white under a dusting of snow. I felt something I hadn't in years, a flutter of anticipation, a pulse of life. When we landed, James turned to me. Well, Cynthia Norman, if you ever need a guide for European Christmas markets, I happen to be excellent at getting lost. I laughed. Lucky for you, I'm excellent at finding my way back. He extended his hand, not just in greeting this time, but in quiet companionship. Then maybe we'll make a good pair. I hesitated, then took his hand. Warm, steady, human. As we walked off the plane together, I thought of Robert's scrapbook and the blank pages waiting for me back home. Maybe this was how it began. Not with grand gestures or resolutions, but with one brave decision, one open seat, and one stranger who asked the right question. For the first time in years, I wasn't just alive. I was living. Munich looked like something painted from memory. A city made of light, snow, and music. The taxi dropped me at Marienplatz just as dusk settled, and the first thing that struck me wasn't the cold, but the sound. Bells chiming above the low hum of laughter and song. The air smelled of cinnamon, roasted nuts, and something sweet I couldn't name. Everything glowed, even the cobblestones, as if the city itself had decided to shine for Christmas. For years, I dreaded this season. The smell of pine, the flicker of lights, the way other people seemed to live inside joy while I stood outside looking in. But that night in Munich, standing under a sky thick with falling snow, I felt something stir inside me, something I thought had gone quiet forever. James walked beside me, his scarf pulled high against the wind. "First time in Germany?" he asked, his breath clouding in the air. "First time anywhere without a plan," I said. He smiled. "That's the best kind of trip." The streets were crowded but gentle, people bumping shoulders with soft apologies, children dragging wooden toys, vendors calling out in lilting accents. It was chaotic, alive, human. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt so surrounded by life. We stopped at a stall selling ornaments. Tiny glass angels caught the light, shimmering like fragile stars. I lifted one carefully. Golden wings, silver dress, a face painted with a single calm smile. "Robert used to buy me one every year," I said, almost to myself. James looked at me quietly. "Then you should buy this one for yourself." I did. And as the vendor wrapped it in paper, I realized he was right. I'd spent so long waiting for other people to give me permission to feel alive. Maybe this was how I took it back. The hotel was small and charming, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. My room overlooked the market square, its window glowing in soft orange light. When I opened the shutters, I could hear the faint echo of a choir singing O Tannenbaum. I stood there for a while, letting the sound fill the space where loneliness usually lived. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from James. "Found a cafe that might change your mind about jet lag. Care to test my theory?" I hesitated. Old instincts told me to decline, to stay in my safe cocoon of solitude. But another voice whispered, "You didn't cross an ocean to hide again." The cafe was tucked down a narrow alley paved with wet stones that reflected the glow of streetlights. Inside, it smelled of butter, coffee, and warmth. James was already there, a newspaper folded neatly beside two steaming cups. "You came," he said, his eyes lighting up. "I almost didn't," I admitted. I'll take almost as progress. The apple strudel arrived, golden and delicate, dusted with sugar. When I took the first bite, I laughed. "All right, I'm convinced," raised his mug in mock victory. "Told you. Never doubt a man with a sweet tooth." We talked for hours about his years as an architect, my decades as a librarian, our children, our ghosts. He told me about Maureen, his wife, who had died of cancer 10 years ago. "She was a painter," he said softly. "Color followed her everywhere. I swear, the house turned gray when she left." I told him about Robert, how he'd been my steady rhythm in a world that never stopped changing. We didn't compare griefs. We simply let them sit between us, like two familiar guests we no longer feared. Do you ever stop missing them? I asked. James stirred his coffee, thoughtful. No, he said finally. But the missing becomes gentler. It stops being a wound and starts being a reminder. Something in me unclenched at that. When we finally left the cafe, the night had deepened. The city was drenched in light. Lanterns hanging over the market, stalls glowing gold and red. A violinist played under an awning, the notes of silent night drifting like snowflakes. James handed me a cup of hot glühwein. The heat seeped through my gloves, warming more than my hands. To new traditions, he said, raising his cup. To remembering who we are, I replied. He smiled, and for a moment, I saw not a stranger, but a mirror. Someone who had also learned that loss could be the beginning of something, not just the end. Later, walking back to my hotel, my phone buzzed. A message from Amanda. Hope you're okay. The kids miss you. Maybe next year we can all spend Christmas together. Then another. Ethan said you're in Europe? That's unexpected. Wish you'd told us. Her tone was polite, but I could feel the edge of disapproval hiding under it. That quiet, tidy judgment that had followed me ever since Robert died. For years, I'd accepted maybe next year like it was kindness, when really it was distance in disguise. I slipped the phone into my pocket without replying. The market music swelled, bells chiming from somewhere beyond the square. I looked up at the cathedral spires, their tips lost in the snow, and realized I didn't need their permission to live my life. The world was still moving, and I was finally moving with it. Back in my room, I unwrapped the angel ornament and placed it beside Robert's carving on the desk. Two angels side by side, past and present. I lit a small candle, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window, watching Munich glow. The scrapbook lay on the bed, open to a blank page. I took my pen and glued my boarding pass inside. Beneath it, in slow, deliberate handwriting, I wrote, Munich, the city that reminded me how to breathe. Then one more line, smaller, tucked beneath the first. When life tells you to stay home, pack your bags. I stared at the words for a long time. They didn't feel like something I'd written. They felt like something I'd waited my whole life to hear. Outside, the snow fell thicker, muffling the world. A couple laughed in the street below. The church bells chimed 9. And somewhere inside me, a quiet joy began to take root. Fragile, yes, but alive. I closed the scrapbook, ran my hand across the cover, and whispered, I did it, Robert. I finally did it. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself, older, softer, but glowing in a way I hadn't since before the world broke open. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in memory. I was part of it again. It started as a small moment, one I didn't think twice about. A photo, snapped by a stranger in the Munich market. The lights behind me were golden and soft. James stood beside me, a cup of glühwein in his hand. Both of us laughing at something I can't even remember. It wasn't posed, wasn't perfect, but there was a kind of quiet joy in it, the sort that lives between people who've survived enough winters to appreciate warmth when it finally finds them. That night, back at my hotel, I posted it. Just one photo. No caption, just a beautiful night in Munich. I didn't expect anyone to notice. By morning, the picture had spread. Faster than I could have imagined. Messages pinged from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old colleagues from the library, distant cousins, even former neighbors. You look radiant, Cynthia. Who's the handsome man? And then, Inevitably. Did you use Robert's savings for that trip? I stared at the screen, heart thudding. It felt strange to be seen again. For so long, I'd been invisible, the quiet widow in the corner of family photos. Now, suddenly, my life had become a story other people wanted to interpret. Then came the call. Mom, Ethan's voice, rushed, slightly strained. Are you in Germany? I hesitated. Good morning to you too, sweetheart. I just saw your photo on Aunt Janine's Facebook. Who is that man? And did you seriously fly across the world alone? I could almost picture his expression, that half panic, half disbelief look children give when they realize their parents have inner lives. Yes, I said calmly. His name's James. He's a friend. A friend? He repeated, the word sharp with skepticism. You could have told me. Amanda and I were worried sick. Were you? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Because from where I stood, no one seemed very concerned about my Christmas plans. He fell silent. Then, defensively, That's not fair, Mom. We didn't think. No, you didn't. I interrupted gently. And that's all right. I needed to think for myself this time. On the other end, a long sigh. You're trending online, you know that? People are sharing your picture with all kinds of comments. Amanda says it looks inappropriate. I almost laughed. At my age, Ethan, I'm not sure anything counts as inappropriate anymore. Mom, it's all right, I said softly. Let them talk. For once, I don't mind being the subject of gossip. It means I'm finally living again. The line went quiet except for the sound of his breathing. Then, quietly, I didn't mean to make you feel left out. I know, I said, but you did. And maybe I needed that distance to realize how small I'd made myself trying to stay close. Mom, his voice cracked slightly. I just don't want you to get hurt. I already was, I said gently. But this is me healing. When we hung up, I sat by the window, staring out at the falling snow. Below, people moved through the market, children tugging on mittens, couples sharing pastries, the world carrying on, blissfully unaware of a 67-year-old woman halfway across the ocean reclaiming her own story. A notification chimed. Another message, this one from my neighbor back in Seattle. Saw your photo. You look happy, Sin. It suits you. Happy. Such a simple word, one I hadn't seen next to my name in so long. James knocked on my door later that morning, holding 2 cups of coffee. You look like someone who's been reading comments online, he said. I groaned. Apparently, I've gone viral. He raised an eyebrow. Should I start practicing my autograph? I laughed, shaking my head. They're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a photo. Sometimes, he said, setting the coffee down. A single photo reminds people they're allowed to begin again. Maybe that's why it's spreading. His words hit deeper than I expected. We spent the day wandering through the city. The art museum, the river, a small chapel that smelled of wax and pine. People greeted us, smiled at us, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a woman defined by her losses. I felt like a person, a living, breathing story still being written. That evening, as the sky turned lavender, James and I returned to the market. The lights reflected off the snow like tiny stars. I took out my phone and snapped another picture, this time of the scene itself. The laughter, the glow, the hands reaching for each other in the cold. I posted it with a new caption. Happiness doesn't ask for permission. Almost instantly, messages poured in again, some supportive, some surprised, a few confused. But One comment from an old library patron made me smile. I remember when you used to say books were for finding pieces of ourselves. Looks like you found one. That night, over dinner, James raised his glass. To the internet, he said dryly. I laughed. To unexpected fame? To being seen, he corrected, even if it's by accident. We clinked glasses, and I realized something. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't even angry at the whispers, because the truth was, I had changed. The woman in that photo wasn't running away from grief. She was running toward life. Before bed, I scrolled through the comments one last time. Some made me laugh, others rolled off me like water. Then I saw Ethan's name appear under the photo. He'd written, "That's my mom. She's the bravest person I know." My breath caught. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was acknowledgement, and that was enough. I set the phone down, feeling the quiet hum of the city outside. Somewhere beyond the window, bells rang, faint and distant. Robert once told me that every choice we make sends ripples through the world, even the small ones. I used to think he meant that as a warning. Now, I think he meant it as a promise. That night, I fell asleep to the soft glow of the city lights, my phone buzzing gently on the nightstand. I didn't check it. For once, the world could talk all it wanted. I was already living the next chapter. Vienna felt like it had been waiting for me, a city built from silence and song. Snow drifted through the air in lazy spirals, softening the sharp edges of rooftops and statues. The world here didn't rush. It exhaled. After the gold and bustle of Munich, this place felt gentler, like an inhale after a long cry. James and I took the train instead of flying. Some places deserve to be arrived at slowly, he said. And I agreed. The landscape rolled past the window. White fields, crooked trees, and tiny villages whose church bells seemed to follow us through the snow. I sat by the window, gloved hands cupped around a paper cup of coffee, and realized I wasn't running anymore. For the first time in years, I was simply going. When we arrived, Vienna greeted us in soft gray light. Our hotel was near St. Stephen's Cathedral, its tall spire piercing the clouds, its bells tolling with the kind of confidence only centuries can give. From my window, I could see horse-drawn carriages cutting through the slush, their wheels whispering against the cobblestones. That afternoon, James led me to Café Mozart, a place that smelled like butter, coffee, and nostalgia. Inside, marble tables gleamed under amber light, and a pianist in the corner played something that floated like a sigh. As I sat, James reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn book. He placed it between us. "I think this belongs to you," he said. It was On Kindness. The cover was faded, the corners frayed from years of use. I smiled. It had been one of Robert's favorite books. But when I opened it, I froze. Inside, written in familiar ink, were the words, "To James, from Robert. For your gentle debates and kinder heart, December 2010. My breath caught. "Robert?" James nodded. "Yes. We were in a little book club together. He joined during the winter his health started to fade. He talked about you a lot, about how you saw the good in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. He said kindness was your rebellion." I swallowed hard. He never told me. "He wouldn't have," James said softly. "He didn't talk about himself. He talked about you." The piano changed songs, the melody wrapping itself around us like a hush. I ran my fingers over Robert's signature. The familiar tilt of the R, the firm loop of the T. My heart ached, but not from pain. from recognition. I thought I'd come to Europe to find something new, I whispered. But somehow he's still here, giving me pieces of what I need. James smiled gently. Maybe love doesn't end. Maybe it just changes form. We spent the afternoon walking through the city, our breath fogging in the cold. Vienna unfolded like a painting. Domed cathedrals, glowing street lamps, the smell of roasted chestnuts curling through the air. We passed a violinist playing under a bridge. The notes followed us long after we turned the corner. At sunset, we found a restaurant overlooking the Danube. Inside, candles flickered on each table, their flames trembling every time someone laughed. The waiter poured red wine into thin glasses, and I felt the familiar nervous flutter that comes when something new begins, even if you don't yet know its name. James raised his glass first. To second chances, he said. I smiled, meeting his eyes. And to the courage to believe we deserve them. Our glasses touched with a soft chime. The wine was warm and rich, spreading heat through my chest. For a while, we didn't talk. We just listened to the soft hum of conversation around us. Then James said quietly, You know, Robert used to say something that stuck with me. He said the kindest people are always the loneliest, because they're the ones who keep everyone else warm. I looked down at my glass, smiling through tears. He always did have a way with words. He was right, James said, but I think you deserve to be warm too. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just held his gaze until the silence between us said everything that needed saying. When dinner ended, James pulled out a small sketchbook. I have something else for you, he said. On one of the pages was a pencil sketch. Me, sitting in the cafe earlier, my hands wrapped around a teacup, my face turned toward the light. The drawing was soft, unfinished, but alive. It's beautiful, I said. He shrugged. It's you. The way I saw you when you were reading that inscription. Peaceful, like you finally stopped fighting with the past. Outside, the snow thickened. The city glowed gold through it. We walked together in quiet, our footsteps muffled by the softness of the night. At the corner near my hotel, he stopped. You know, he said, life doesn't often give us do-overs, but it gives us echoes, a chance to hear something again and respond differently. I looked up at him. Then maybe this is my echo. He smiled, and before I could overthink it, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were warm, steady, the kind of warmth that doesn't burn. It holds. Later, in my hotel room, I sat by the window with Robert's book in my lap. The city below shimmered, soft light reflected on the river. I turned the first page again and traced his handwriting. The ink was faded, but the message was clear. Love, real love, leaves marks that time can't erase. I opened my scrapbook, glued the restaurant's wine label onto a blank page, and wrote beneath it, Vienna, the city where kindness found its way back to me. Then, another line, 2 second chances, and to the people who remind us that our story isn't finished. I sat there until the candle burned low, until the bells of St. Stephen's began to ring midnight. I raised my glass toward the window and whispered, to Robert, and to the echoes that bring us home. Outside, snow fell harder, but the city didn't sleep. Somewhere below, laughter echoed off the cobblestones, soft and human. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't dream of loss. I dreamed of music, of laughter, Robert's, mine, and James's, 3 notes of the same melody, reminding me that grief and grace often share the same song. When I returned to Seattle, the city looked exactly the same. The gray sky, the slow drizzle, the familiar hum of morning traffic. And yet, everything felt different. It wasn't the city that had changed. It was me. The house greeted me with silence, as always. But the silence didn't weigh the same way anymore. It was no longer loneliness. It was space. Something that could hold warmth again. The faint smell of cedar still lingered from the candles I'd burned before I left, and for the first time, the air didn't smell stale. It smelled like home. I stood in the doorway, suitcase still in hand, and whispered, "I'm back." It was strange, hearing my own voice echo in that space. For years, I had filled this house with noise, television, the ticking clock, the kettle, anything to drown out the sound of missing someone. But now, silence didn't scare me. I'd learned to sit with it. I'd learned that silence could also mean peace. I spent the next morning unpacking. Each folded sweater, each photograph tucked between pages of my scrapbook, carried a piece of Europe with it. Laughter, music, warmth. When I reached the little wooden angel I'd bought in Munich, I held it for a long time before hanging it on the tree. Then I placed Robert's book beside it on the mantel. Two relics of love, one from the past, one from what was quietly becoming my future. The phone rang that afternoon. It was Ethan. I hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice sounded careful, unsure. I saw the rest of your photos. You've been busy." I smiled. Busy remembering how to live. He laughed nervously. "I deserve that." "You did," I said softly. There was a pause, not awkward, just tender. Then, in a quieter voice, "I'm sorry, Mom, for the way I've made you feel, for making you think you weren't part of the family anymore." I let out a slow breath. I'd imagined this moment so many times. The apology, the tears. But now that it was here, I didn't need any of that. What I needed was honesty. "Ethan," I said, "when you told me to stay home, I did. But what I realized was that home isn't a place where you wait for someone to remember you. It's something you carry when you finally remember yourself." He was quiet. I could hear him exhale on the other end. "You're right. I was selfish. I didn't see it then. I thought, maybe you like the quiet." "I did," I said, "until I didn't. But it wasn't your job to fix that. It was mine." Another pause. Then, "I want to make things right, Mom." "You already have," I said. "You called." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "We're thinking of visiting next weekend. The kids want to see Grandma and your Christmas tree. Amanda's baking that gingerbread you like." I smiled. "That sounds perfect." When we hung up, I stood there for a long while, phone in, hand. It was strange. Forgiveness wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks. It arrived quietly, like snow settling on the ground, covering old scars, without pretending they'd never been there. That evening, James called from Vienna. "Did you make it home?" he asked. "I did," I said. "The house feels different." "Maybe it's not the house," he said. "Maybe it's you." I laughed. "You always know what to say, don't you?" He chuckled. "Architect's instinct. We notice when foundations shift." His voice carried that familiar warmth, like the steady hum of a fireplace. "Cynthia," he said, "promise me something. Don't let the old silence trick you into thinking it's still the same." "I won't," I said. "I'm learning the difference between quiet and empty." "Good," he replied. "Then I think you're doing just fine." After we said goodnight, I sat on the couch, the lights of the Christmas tree flickering softly. My reflection shimmered faintly in the window. Older, yes, but steadier. There was something liberating about the stillness. The next day, Ethan and Amanda arrived with the kids. The sound of their laughter filled the house like sunlight. Lily ran to the tree, pointing. "Grandma, did you put up two angels?" "I did," I said, smiling. "One for the past, one for the present." Amanda looked around the room, eyes catching on the photos from my trip. Me in Munich, laughing beside James. Me in Vienna, standing in front of the cathedral. Her voice was soft when she said, "You look happy?" "I am," I said simply. Ethan nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We should have seen that you needed more than visits and calls, Mom. You needed your own life." I walked over, touched his arm gently. "And you needed to see that I could have one." The kids pulled us to the table for cookies and cocoa. Laughter echoed through the kitchen. It wasn't perfect. Families never are. But it was real. And that was enough. Later that night, after they left, I stood in the doorway, watching the snow fall outside. My reflection in the glass no longer looked like a woman waiting. It looked like someone who had finally come home to herself. My phone buzzed. A message from James. A photo. A table in Vienna. 2 glasses of wine. And a small caption. To second chances. I smiled and typed back. And to new boundaries. The kind that keep us growing, not apart. I placed the phone down, turned off the lights, and let the glow of the tree fill the room. The angels on the branches caught the light, casting small halos against the wall. For years, I thought forgiveness meant reopening every door. Now I understood it meant knowing which ones to leave closed and being at peace with both. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt whole. The morning light fell softly across the living room, catching on the golden wings of the angel ornament. For the first time in what felt like forever, my home didn't feel like a museum of memories. It felt alive. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from the fireplace, but from peace. Seattle's winter sunlight had a way of sneaking through clouds in thin, deliberate strands. And that morning, it landed right on the photo of Robert and me that still sat on the mantel. His smile seemed gentler now, less like a goodbye, more like a blessing. I walked to the kitchen, still wearing my robe, and made coffee. The smell filled the house, earthy, comforting, grounding. Every small sound, the click of the mug, the soft creak of the wooden floor, reminded me that I was here. Fully, finally, here. It had been 2 weeks since Ethan's visit. 2 weeks since forgiveness quietly folded itself into the corners of this house. The silence no longer carried shame. It was simply mine. I sat by the window, watching flakes of snow drift past the garden. The same garden Robert had once tended every morning, whistling while pruning the roses. For years, I couldn't step outside without hearing his absence in every rustle of leaves. But now, when the wind stirred, I didn't hear sorrow. I heard presence. There's a kind of magic in realizing grief isn't the enemy. It's just proof that something mattered deeply enough to leave a mark. On the table beside me lay my scrapbook, the one I'd started in Munich. I opened it slowly. Each page was a chapter of rebirth. A ticket stub, a note from James, a photograph from Vienna where I was laughing, mid-conversation, completely unaware someone had taken my picture. My hair had blown across my face, and my smile wasn't careful anymore. It was real. I touched the page lightly, then flipped to the back where the last few sheets were still blank. The story wasn't over. Not yet. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from James. Thinking of you. Snow in Vienna tonight, the same kind that fell the day we met. I smiled. My reply came naturally. Snow here too. Maybe it's the world's way of keeping promises. He sent back a photo. The Danube at dusk, pale blue and silver. Below it, he wrote, Keep writing your story, Cynthia. The world's finally listening. After the call, I bundled up and stepped outside. The air was crisp, my breath rising in small clouds. The neighborhood was quiet, every roof dusted in white. I walked down the path Robert had built himself, those uneven stones that had always annoyed me. Now they felt perfect in their imperfection, like the rest of life. Halfway to the mailbox, I noticed the sound of laughter. My neighbor, Mrs. Collins, was helping her granddaughter build a snowman. You've been gone, haven't you? She called out cheerfully. Europe, was it? Something like that, I said. You look younger. She smiled. Whatever you did, keep doing it. I laughed, thanking her, and realized she was right. The mirror had begun to show me someone softer, steadier, not younger in years, but lighter in spirit. When I returned inside, I brewed another cup of coffee and sat at Robert's old writing desk, the same one I'd avoided for years. Dust still lingered in the corners, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt like time waiting to be filled. I opened a blank journal. Not the scrapbook this time, but a real journal, just for me. The pen felt cool and unfamiliar in my hand. Then I began to write. I used to think coming home meant returning to a place, but maybe it means returning to yourself, to the parts you buried under grief, under guilt, under waiting. Today, I feel like I'm finally back, not in the house, in me. I paused, reading the words. They didn't sound like something I'd written. They sounded like something I'd remembered. The doorbell rang just as I closed the journal. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, holding a small box tied with red ribbon. Mom, he said, smiling. We wanted you to have this. Inside was a framed photo. Me with the kids from our last visit, laughing around the tree. At the bottom, Amanda had written, To the woman who reminds us that joy is something you choose. Tears blurred the edges of my vision, but they weren't sad. Tell her I love it, I said. He nodded. She knows. When he left, I set the photo beside Robert's book on the mantel. 2 lives, 2 loves, not competing, just coexisting. It felt right. As evening fell, I lit a candle. The house filled with a faint scent of pine and cinnamon. Shadows from the tree danced across the walls. I sat down and whispered into the stillness. You'd like him, Robert. He reminds me of you. But not in the way that hurts, in the way that heals. The wind brushed softly against the window, as if answering. I looked up at the angel ornaments, one from Robert, one from Munich, and thought how strange it was that love could stretch across so many seasons, changing shape but never fading. Maybe this was what coming home truly meant, not going back to what was, but standing still long enough to feel that you've arrived where you belong. I opened my scrapbook again and wrote one final line beneath the empty page. Home was never a place. It was the moment I realized I was worth coming back to. Then I closed the book gently, set it beside the candle, and smiled. Outside, the snow was still falling. Soft, unhurried, endless. Inside, for the first time in years, I was not waiting for anyone to come home. Because I already had. 1 year later, the house no longer felt like a museum of loss. It breathed again. The walls, once heavy with silence, now carried the faint hum of life. The sound of the oven timer, the laughter of children, the crackle of the fireplace that hadn't been lit since Robert's last Christmas. It was snowing again, the kind of slow, thoughtful snow that makes you pause at the window and remember how beautiful the world can be when it's quiet. I stood in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, rolling dough for gingerbread cookies. The recipe was Robert's. For years, I couldn't bring myself to make it. It felt sacred, like a ritual I wasn't worthy of without him. But this year, I didn't cry when I saw his handwriting in the margins. I smiled. Amanda's voice floated from the living room. Cynthia, can you show me the glaze you mentioned? The one Robert used to make? I wiped my hands on a towel and joined her by the counter. She was leaning over a tray of cookies, her brow furrowed in concentration. You're pressing too hard, I said softly. The trick is a light touch. Let the icing follow your breath. She laughed. You make it sound like yoga for bakers. It kind of is, I said, smiling. It's about patience. Amanda glanced at me, a small, genuine smile. I can see why Robert loved making these with you. For a moment, I didn't answer. I just watched the light from the tree flicker across her face. Softer now, warmer. We'd both changed this year, each in our own way. I could see it in her eyes, the way she looked at me. Not out of obligation, but out of something closer to understanding. Do you know what he used to say? I asked, leaning over to pipe the final swirl on a cookie. He said baking is proof that love can be measured, not by what you make, but by the care you put into it. Amanda nodded. That sounds like him. Then, after a pause, it also sounds like you. Before I could respond, Ethan's voice called from the living room. Mom, you might want to come see this. When I walked in, the whole family was gathered around the tree. The same one that once stood in front of me like a symbol of everything I'd lost. Now it shimmered under a dozen tiny hands worth of ornaments, each placed crookedly but perfectly. Lily, my granddaughter, held up a small wooden angel. Where does this one go, Grandma? Anywhere you want, I said. She placed it near the top, beside the angel from Munich and the one Robert had carved years ago. Two symbols of two lives that had somehow become one continuous thread. Ethan stood beside the fireplace, holding a glass of wine. Mom, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Can I say something before dinner? Of course. He cleared his throat. I've been thinking a lot about this past year, about how I treated you, about how much I didn't understand. His gaze flicked to Amanda, who nodded encouragingly. When you left for Europe, I thought you were lost. But now I see that you weren't running away. You were finding yourself, and somehow that helped us find you again, too. The room went quiet except for the faint hiss of the fire. I felt my throat tighten. But this time, the tears that came were warm, not heavy. Ethan raised his glass. To Mom, for teaching us that happiness isn't something you wait for, it's something you choose. And that sometimes distance is the only teacher that sticks. I looked at him. My son, the boy who once told me to stay home, now standing there with eyes full of pride. I lifted my glass. To growth, I said. To the courage to learn late, and to the grace that lets us forgive anyway. The clinking of glasses filled the room, followed by laughter, followed by a lightness I hadn't felt in years. Later that evening, the house settled into that familiar hum of post-dinner calm. dishes soaking in the sink, children half asleep on the couch. The fire had burned low, glowing amber in the dark. I slipped outside for a moment, coat wrapped tightly around me. The air was crisp, the snow catching the light from the windows. A car pulled up quietly. James stepped out, holding a bouquet of winter roses and a small box. "You didn't think I'd miss your famous cookies, did you?" I laughed. "You're just in time for the last batch." He followed me inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. The children immediately swarmed him with questions about Vienna, about the fancy castles, about whether he still drew in his sketchbook. He answered each one with patient warmth, his eyes always finding mine in between sentences. Amanda handed him a mug of cocoa. "You must be James," she said. "We've heard. A lot." He smiled. "All true, I hope." Ethan grinned. "Mostly." When the kids were finally tucked in, we all gathered for one last photo. Me, Ethan, Amanda, the grandchildren, and James. I set the timer on the camera and stood in the middle, my hands resting lightly on my family, the people I'd nearly lost, and the man who helped me find myself. The flash went off, a moment captured, a new kind of Christmas. As everyone laughed, James leaned close and whispered, "You look happy." "I am," I said simply. After they left, I sat by the window, looking at the photograph on my phone. The image glowed faintly. 5 smiles, 2 angels in the background, one heart finally at peace. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, endless, forgiving. I thought of Robert, of that quiet December years ago when he asked me to take care of everyone. "I did love," I whispered into the night, "but I finally remembered to take care of me, too." I opened my scrapbook one last time and added the photo to the final page. Beneath it, I wrote in careful, steady handwriting, "The Christmas after. Proof that joy can return to the same place where grief once lived." Then, in smaller letters beneath, "When life tells you to stay home, pack your bags. You might just find yourself along the way." I placed the book back on the mantel, next to Robert's angel. The lights on the tree flickered gently, casting halos across the room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the ending of someone else's story. I felt like the beginning of my own. In the end, revenge didn't look like anger or punishment. It looked like peace, like choosing joy in the very life they once told me to live smaller in. I didn't need to prove them wrong. I just had to keep becoming the woman they never thought I could be. So if you've ever been told to stay home, to play small, or to wait your turn, tell me, what did it take for you to start living for yourself again? Because maybe the quietest revenge is simply this: to build a life that no longer needs anyone's permission to shine.